I finally watched Furiosa. People claimed it was a girl boss movie, but all I saw was a solid action film that came out 10 years too late. There's a time and place for everything, and I think Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, missed its time. I've never been much of a Mad Max fan, but I have seen all the movies. I think the movies are enjoyable, but they're not my go-to thing to watch. So, when George Miller returned to the wasteland in 2015's Mad Max Fury Road, I wasn't that interested. Now, at the time, the film caught flack because it focused on Furiosa over Max. This was just after Gamergate and during the waning days of criticism against feminists. Some people took Furiosa as another strong woman feminist archetype and trashed the trailer. Then they went and saw the movie, loved it, and sang its praises. They quickly forgot they spent months criticizing the film, and over the last 9 years, those people usually cite Fury Road and Furiosa as an example of one of the good female-led films. I wanted to give that backdrop because, ironically, the same thing has happened with Furiosa. When the trailers came out, a certain segment of online critics trashed the film as yet another girl boss movie. They spent months doing this in dozens of videos, but when the film finally hit theaters, their predictions turned out not to be true. But unlike what happened with Fury Road, the group split. Some of them admitted the film was good and tried to pretend they didn't trash it. Some kept claiming the film was some woke DEI, ESG, LMNOP plus asterisk hashtag up down left right whole day press star conspiracy against them. And some pretended to watch the film and then critiqued something they never saw. Now, to be clear, I have seen the film. Not in theaters, but when it came out on streaming. I figured I'd check it out since I like Fury Road, and since it looks like this is the future we're headed towards, I thought I'd take some notes. The movie seems to be doing well on streaming, but it did not do well in theaters. It bombed. It had one of the worst domestic openings of the year, and barely made back its nearly $170 million budget. Considering how much people praised Fury Road and how it did twice as well on the same budget, the question is, why did Furiosa bomb? It's not the story. It's a good story, and I'll get to that later. I think it comes down to when the movie came out. I think the nostalgia kick for Mad Max wore off after nearly a decade. Fury Road did well, but it appeals to a very specific audience, and I don't think that largely older crowd was enough to save the film. Maybe YouTube critics labeling it a girl boss movie hurt the box office, but I doubt it. I think the movie came out too late. It would have been better if it came out a couple of years after the last one. Originally, George Miller wanted to film both movies back to back, but later decided to only film Fury Road. He also spent 15 years developing a story for all the characters in both films, and that definitely shows in the movies. You get the sense that everything you see has meaning and intent, even if it's not clear what that might be. We get that in spades in Furiosa, Mad Max Saga. The film tells the story of Furiosa's life and what leads to the events of Fury Road. The film is broken down into 4 chapters: Capture and Loss of Innocence, An Exchange, Reinvention, and The Darkest of Angels. Each highlights a pivotal point in Furiosa's journey, the moments that make her into the woman we see in Fury Road. In Capture and Loss of Innocence, we see that Furiosa lives in the Green Place, one of the few areas not turned into a desert. Bikers who work for Dementis somehow find the Green Place. Furiosa spots them and tries to sabotage their bikes, but gets caught, and her mother Mary chases after the bikers to rescue Furiosa. Furiosa is then brought toward Dementis, who wants to know where to find the Green Place, but Furiosa won't talk, and the only biker who survives Mary's counterattack dies before he can tell anyone the way. Mary saves Furiosa, killing all the men but sparing the woman, who later rats her out, and Dementis gives chase. Mary gives Furiosa a peach pit, draws a map to how to find the Green Place on Furiosa's left arm, and tells Furiosa to go alone and try to get home while she distracts Dementis, but Furiosa instead turns back, gets captured, and Dementis forces her to watch her mother get tortured to death. In an exchange, Dementis decides that he wants to take control over the Citadel, one of the great fortresses in the wasteland, and the one controlled by Immortan Joe from Fury Road. However, this goes horribly wrong, and Dementis gets destroyed by the War Boys. He then decides to take over Gastown, disguising his crew as Immortan Joe's people to get in. He wins and rigs the place to blow, and when he goes to negotiate for peace with Immortan Joe, he brings along Furiosa, claiming she's his daughter. Joe doesn't buy this, and Furiosa finally speaks, saying Dementis isn't her father. Immortan Joe makes a deal with Dementis but forces him to give up Furiosa and his main mechanic. In Reinvention, Immortan Joe makes Furiosa one of his wives. Furiosa cuts off her hair and makes a wig out of it. Later on, one of Immortan Joe's sons, Rictus Erectus, takes a liking to Furiosa and tries to assault her, but when he grabs her hair, the wig comes off and Furiosa escapes. Years pass and Furiosa lives as one of the war boys, continuing not to speak to hide her sex. She and her crew build a war rig, and on their first run with Praetorian Jack, they get attacked by one of Dementus' men who's gone rogue. The war boys defend the rig, but only Jack and Furiosa survive. Furiosa tries to take the rig, but Jack boots her out and leaves her stranded only to come back and have her join him. Later they're sent to Gastown, which has fallen under total chaos under Dementus. The pair barely make it out alive and inform Immortan Joe about the situation. He then sends them to Bullet Town to get the ammo needed to take out Dementus, but Dementus is already there. The pair again barely manage to survive, and Furiosa decides to tell Jack about the green place and to head there. However, Dementus catches up to them. Furiosa's arm with the map gets injured during the attack, and the pair end up getting caught. Dementus hangs her from her wounded arm and chains Jack to a motorcycle and tortures him to death. After some time passes, Dementus checks on Furiosa only to find her arm. In the darkest of angels, Furiosa returns to the Citadel and informs Immortan Joe about what happened. She builds a replacement arm and eventually tracks down Dementus and what remains of his biker horde. She makes short work of his crew before getting to Dementus, who doesn't recognize her. She tells him about how he killed her mother and what that's done to her, but he still doesn't recognize her. He does, however, give his own story of suffering, of his family dying. Furiosa pummels the crap out of him and eventually reaches for this teddy bear Dementus wears. He'd once given it to her as a child and then took it back when Immortan Joe took her. That jogs his memory, and he says that he's been waiting for her to come and kill him. The film ends with different versions of how people think Furiosa kills Dementus, each one more creative than the last. Overall, I thought it was a solid film. A little long, it's about 2 hours and 30 minutes, it's the longest of the Mad Max films, but the pacing is good. The action, though, is incredible. George Miller has not lost a step in the action department, and it's not just a spectacle. He excels at glorious destruction and chaos, but it's really the tension that makes the scene so great. Miller makes it feel like nobody's safe. Obviously, nothing serious ever happens to Max, and we already knew Furiosa would lose an arm, but in the moment, it feels like Furiosa could die at any time. The scenes feel dangerous, and that's because Miller gets the audience right next to the action. You feel like you're going to get pulled under the wheels of the war rig, like someone's trying to stab you, like you're hanging hundreds of feet in the air off a chain that could snap any second. And he also takes the time to vary the kills. For example, when Jack and Furiosa are heading to Gastown, you know that the war boys are about to get annihilated, but you don't know exactly how it's going to happen. Some of them just get killed outright, some of them get killed seemingly by accident, and some of them have their deaths foreshadowed for the whole frickin' scene. And because the film is 2.5 hours long, we get some time to breathe between the action set pieces, which gives them more weight. You know what's coming, and man, are you happy when it arrives. The film is also strong on world building, but a little weak on explaining it. There's a lot to see, and clearly a deeper world, but you don't get a lot of exposition. We don't know how this green place exists. We don't get any information about Mary, Furiosa's mother, or their community. The wasteland itself is never explained, and the reason for the world looking the way it does changes with each film, so don't go looking for continuity. I can see how that could turn some people off, but the lack of info isn't an accident. Miller intentionally doesn't explain things, instead treating the wasteland like a modern-day setting in films. No one explains what modern-day New York or Chicago or Paris or Tokyo is like. You film there and just go with it because the audience already knows the ins and outs, or close enough, so it works. Now, it will stop working once time passes because people won't know the references. Watch a movie from the 1930s or 40s and you'll see what I mean. The movies still work, but it can get confusing if you don't know what people are talking about or why they behave in certain ways. That's pretty common for most films, but it's unusual to see that done with a futuristic story. Most sci-fi stories give the audience some background information, but not George Miller. He just throws you in. It shouldn't work, but because Miller spent so much time developing the world, he knows how the world works, so he writes the characters with that knowledge, and he ends up with a believable world that seems more like a place you've never been than something that doesn't exist. When it comes to performances, Alila Brown and Anya Taylor-Joy do great jobs as young Furiosa and older Furiosa respectively. Brown plays Furiosa for most of the film, and even though she doesn't say much, she constantly shows that Furiosa is plotting and thinking and maneuvering. I give Brown credit because it's a tough job to convey all the things that are going on in the character's mind, and that's a tough thing to portray for a young actress. Honestly, she does such an excellent job of it, you have a pretty good idea what Furiosa would say if she actually spoke. When Taylor-Joy takes over, she doesn't do much more talking, at least not till the end of the film, but she also brings the same energy. At no point does she come across as a girl boss. She comes across as someone who's had to fight to survive her entire life, and she fights dirty. That's why she wins. And credit where credit's due, the transition between the two actresses is seamless. It really does feel like this is the same person. And in some of the scenes, I think they're doing some digital replacement or combination between the two actresses. I haven't looked at anything about the special effects for the film yet, so I'll have to double check that, but I wouldn't be surprised if that were the case. However, Chris Hemsworth as Dementus steals the show. Every scene he's in, it's all about him. He's reveling in this psychotic character, and because he jumps from extreme to extreme, it makes it hard to pin down what exactly is wrong with Dementus. Is this someone who's completely lost his mind, a psychopath without any restraints, an agent of chaos, someone who's just playing the hand that he was dealt, or some combination of those? In one moment, Dementus seems like a person who might actually have some sympathy for Furiosa. At one point, he gives her this teddy bear that he carries around, and he kind of implies that that might have belonged to one of his kids. But then he takes it away from her, and the way that he does it comes across as completely childish and petty. It's almost like he's pretending to be an adult. And then you have another scene where he's plotting to take over Gastown, and he seems to actually have a coherent plan. This isn't someone who's play acting or someone who's not intelligent. He's actually thought this out. And then just as quickly as that happens, he turns around and seems to act completely psychotic. I'm pretty sure that's what's on the page, but Hemsworth is clearly enjoying himself playing this character. The last time I saw someone have this much fun being a villain was Ian McDiarmid in Star Wars. He is just chewing up every bit of scenery and enjoying himself. Chris Hemsworth makes this horrible person someone you just can't stop watching, and it makes me want to know more about this character. I'd like to see how Dementus became this way. Unfortunately, that's probably not gonna happen. George Miller said after Fury Road that he wanted to do 2 other Mad Max films, with Furiosa being one of them, but since Furiosa tanked, it might be hard for Miller to get another film going. He's also 79. I don't know his current physical state or health. I would hope that he would be with us for years to come, but he is up there, so Furiosa could easily be his last film. Now, one other option is a potential anime film or show, which he's shown interest in doing back when Fury Road dropped. That would at least put the story in someone else's hands, so if Miller couldn't film it himself or unfortunately passed away, at least the story could get told. Miller seems to have an end in mind, so I'd like to see him get the chance to make that movie. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm not the biggest fan of the franchise, but I have watched all the films and enjoyed them. If he's got a perfect coda for Mad Max, I'd like to see it. Maybe even bring Mel Gibson back. As for Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, it's a solid film. It's not the greatest movie ever made, but it is one hell of a ride. If you like action movies, you definitely need to watch this because George Miller works in action the way other artists work in oils and clay. Such beautiful violence. It's practically poetic. If you like a good character journey, this film nails it. It's one of the best examples of how to develop a character I've seen in a while. While the movie is short on exposition, I don't think you'll miss it. There's more than enough on screen and with the performances to give you everything you need to understand the gist of what's going on. And, like I said before, this is probably where the world is headed, so at least you get a taste of things to come. But what do I know? I'm just some guy.